got a little news on Warren Buffett, where he's in, where he's out. Jenny Horn with the update. What do we got, Jenny?
Yeah, I always find these updates on his holdings so fascinating because he's one of those investors that's so heavily watched and so heavily tracked by various funds and also various investors. So I do think it has some influence here. We did see the fact that Berkshire Hathaway did dump its remaining $780 million stake in GM, which is a stock that Berkshire had been trimming now for several straight quarters. Also selling its $650 million stake in Celanese while exiting smaller positions in United Parcel Service, Johnson & Johnson, Mondelez, and Procter & Gamble. Meanwhile, they trimmed their stake in Amazon and Aon slightly. According to these filings, these holdings were worth more than $1 billion each at the end of September, however. So it wasn't like they were necessarily hemorrhaging these positions. They're just adjusting accordingly, I think. Some of these moves, especially those that are involving some of these smaller positions, could be done by not necessarily Warren Buffett himself. It's seen more as his investing lieutenants right now are doing a lot of these various updates, which we are seeing they manage. His two main sort of right hands do manage about $15 billion each for Berkshire, or $15 billion total, excuse me. And when looking at this name, I do think it's important that their largest holding through the end of their third quarter is still Apple, and it's massive. I mean, they have right now in terms of their value in Apple, almost $157 billion. Compare that to their next smallest holding, which is, Bank of America, and that's just around $28 billion. So they are really, really Apple dependent, and I think that is also very important to keep in mind.
All right. So, big Apple lover still. Guy is like just along for the ride for Bank of America. So, wow, talk about confidence there. And then I didn't get the Oxy, right? There's nothing on Oxy in there.
Well, that's what's so amazing to me is we saw them add a pretty substantial stake in Occidental Petroleum last year, and it was like every time we saw that upping of the stake, we heard reports he could take over the company or at least be a majority shareholder. It's still, it's their sixth top holding, so they do have around $14.5 billion in Oxy, but it just paints a picture of how massive their exposure is outside of that. So I mentioned Apple, Bank of America, but American Express, Coca-Cola, and Chevron are all larger positions from Berkshire Hathaway versus Occidental Petroleum.
Got it. All right. So I guess they've had enough of Oxy for now after just piling into it last year. Taking a little bit of GM off. That's kind of interesting with everything that's happening and the the autos and the strikes and the labor and stuff. So, but I guess maybe we shouldn't read too much into it. But that was like the top of the list of trims, right?
Right. That was a pretty substantial trim. $780 million stake in GM, and interesting that they're shedding their position when it's basically nearing like yearly lows. But they also were buying Occidental at high, so it's not like he has timing figured out perfectly. Just goes to show it's difficult to time these markets.
Very true. All right. Thanks, Jenny. Great report. Appreciate it. All right. Little Buffett action there.